Okay, so now it works?
Yep, it works.
Okay, so today I will be talking about configuration in Elixir, which for many people seems like, well, it's simple. Well, what can be hard about it? So just a little bit about me. I am member of Erlang Ecosystem Foundation Observability Working Group. I am maintainer of the Erlang OpenTelemetry implementation. I have mostly rewritten logger implementation in Elixir 1.10 to match it, to make it work together with Erlang logger, and I maintain some libraries like Mixunused or stuff. So let's start where you can configure your Elixir application. There are at least 5 places. First one is mix application callback, which is like all the things is my presentation. Is application callback, which is I think rarely used in Elixir world. It is mostly common to use such field in application file in Erlang. Mostly because Elixir configuration make it, let's say, easy for developers to implement. The thing is that application callback is attached to your application, while config in configuration files from config directory are not attached to your project. In other words, if you use application callback and your application is used as a dependency, then that configuration will stay there even if it is dependency, and config.exs, runtime.x, and all other files are mostly ignored. These are used only for development or when you are deploying your application. So we have config.x, which allows you to configure your application. It is the oldest way to configure application in Elixir. It has been there for a long time. It has pros and cons. For example, it is evaluated during the compilation, and that provides some issues with which we will be talking later. Config runtime X is the newest addition to that list. It is something that was added, I believe, 1.10, 1.11, where when there was a problem with runtime configuration. Previously, there were other ways to achieve the same thing, or like, for example, using callbacks in repos or Phoenix endpoints. It is personally the way that I still use it. I don't use really runtime X. I don't like that approach, to be honest, and it is the reason for the whole presentation. The config release is now deprecated form. It was earlier used for configuring your application during the runtime, during the release, but it wasn't used in the development, so it was confusing to people. So now we have runtime and stuff. And there is the last one that is most magic one. It is rflags, which allows you to pass configuration options directly to your directly via Erlang runtime flags. It will override almost everything because it due to weirdness in Elixir, it will be sometimes overwritten, sometimes not. So stages when we are running our application, building, configuring, or whatever, there are at least 4 times when our config will be important. First one is compile time. So when we starting our application, when we are running mix compile, it will load our configuration, most of it, and then it will run all our files, because Elixir compilation is a little bit weird, because it is not really that Elixir is reading all the files and then changing into AST and then changing it into the compiled file. It is running the files that we have, even if this file is just .x, not .exs, which is Elixir script. It is run at compile time, and what Elixir compiler does, it is storing all compiled modules into the files. So we are just there is, from the Elixir viewpoint, there is no difference. Mostly there is no difference between compiling and running files. It is just running files, and the difference between compiling and just running them is that after we run the file, we just save all the modules that we have run and save that modules in bin files. So we have compile time when we, as I said, we run all our files during the compilation. So it is like compile and build time, runtime at once. So these two are mostly intertwined between each other. Then we have launch time, which is something that I came with. It is time when we are launching our application. So when our application's start callback function is running, then we are reading configuration, storing it into some variables, and then we just ignore that the configuration ever existed. And the last thing is runtime. So each time we are running a function, then we are checking application configuration for our changed values. So each of these have different behaviors and will be applied differently. This is also why sometimes changing something in configuration requires you to recompile your application or your dependencies. So it is very hard to predict sometimes how your configuration will be applied and when it will be applied, because some of the configuration will be compile time, some will be runtime, some will be startup time. So all of this is really intertwined with each other and hard to follow for the newcomers. So when we are developing our application, we just start the virtual machine, obviously, and we start Mix, which start all of dependencies of Mix. So we cannot configure anything that is configured at a startup time from Mix or its dependencies. We applied environment from our application callback. Then we apply config overriding anything that is in our application callback. When we have that is one thing that we need to remember. The base of the Elixir the Erlang configuration is flat file. So we have only two keys: our application and key that we are configuring. In Elixir, when we use Elixir configuration, we can often see that we have a little bit deeper, because we go like application name, for example, name of our repo, and then we pass a keyword list containing all the information that we need for our repo. But it is not how Erlang sees our configuration. Erlang sees our configuration as a only name of the application and one key. There is no deeper tree of our configuration. So if we apply something in our application callback and then we try to apply the same key in app configuration, then all values in our key will be overridden. It is different from how configuration within config.x works, because in config.x, when we repeat the same key, we just deep merge the configuration. So, for example, it is also a problem with stuff like what was it? OBAN. Why? Because OBAN allows you to configure your plugins, but if we want to disable all plugins, then we cannot pass empty list, because empty list will be deep merged. So all values from previous step, from example, from our configuration that we want to have at the top level, then it will not be overridden. So OBAN does some trick like, okay, you can replace plugin list with value new, and it will be treated as a empty list just for this reason. So for the reason that the lists are deep, the configuration and configuration lists are deeply merged. When we apply our configuration, our application environment, when we apply our config.x, then we apply runtime. It follows exactly the same rule as a config. So it deeply merge values from our, and then we have error flags, which in this case it is in the wrong place. It should be at the top, because these flags are set first. These flags will only change our configuration from application environment, and I believe that config and config runtime would override them anyway. So as you can see, it is quite convoluted, and it became even weirder when we go to runtime. When we go to releases. Why? Because in releases we have a little bit different flow. First, we apply environment from application file. Then we apply sysconfig, which is special file using consult format from Erlang, which is just a list of tuples, and this file will be built automatically by our release from our config.x. Then we start VM and Elixir dependencies. Elixir is also dependency of mix, so it will follow the same pattern here. And then we apply config providers, and by default it will read runtime X, which is in our in our release. Why it is important? Why it is important that this flow is like that? It is all because mixed Elixir dependencies depends on two very important applications from OTP, kernel and standard library. The thing is that if any of these libraries uses startup time configuration, then you cannot configure it. And well, it uses that. So, for example, you cannot configure Erlang logger from Elixir. At least you cannot configure it in configuration in development, because in development that configuration will be discarded, will not be applied during the our startup, because that configuration will not be even there when our application is when kernel application is started. However, if you use config.x and you configure your logger in your development, and you see that it hasn't changed, so okay, maybe it works, just call it a day. And then you go to the configuration and go to release, and then for whatever reason, now your configuration works and breaks everything. So the thing is that when you see here, the configuration from config.x is applied after the VM and mix dependency started. So, and when you see in release, it is started after the kernel application is started after the configuration is applied. So the problem is also with runtime X, which require, if we want to apply our configuration from runtime X into the, for example, logger from kernel, then we need to add additional options from the release. This option will be automatically enabled if we use legacy release X, but let's be honest, as it is not really well documented right now, it sometimes can be confused because sometimes your application will bring some configuration up to your runtime and sometimes not. The configuration will be changed depending on the it will also change probably in OTP 25. At least it will not change for Elixir. In OTP when Elixir will be supporting OTP 25, it will not change until Elixir will support only OTP 25 and up, which will be probably something like Elixir 17 or 1.17. The reason is that we cannot break the guarantees of runtime. So that most of that mess will be with us for a little bit longer, especially relating to logger configuration. But hopefully it will change in the future about how it works, and we will be able to make it a little bit more comprehensible for the future. I was a little bit ill, so mostly that is what I have on slides, but I can speak a little bit more about the problems of Elixir configuration. Like, for example, the thing is that we cannot guarantee when we run our application that our config will ever finish running. Why? Because Elixir configuration is using Elixir for the configuring and running code during our evaluation of the configuration file. So if we have language that is Turing complete and we try to configure our application using language that is Turing complete, then we cannot ensure that our application will ever stop because of the halting problem, which means that if we don't check our configuration before we even run it, then it can cause our problems to our platform. Why? Because we can do everything we want. We can just run loop that will run forever. We can read files, we can send files, we can open HTTP connections, we can open SSH daemon from Elixir because SSH daemon is part of the OTP. So in general, running configuring Elixir in our current state is hard thing to do, and we need to trust our system that we will be deploying. Of course, if we are running if we are able to configure our application during and some attacker will be able to change our configuration before we started our application, then we are already screwed. But in general, it is like something that people should avoid, from at least from my perspective, that we should not be able to run arbitrary code during configuration phase. It should be only left for our runtime that we can run arbitrary code, because we cannot even validate our configuration without doing it in some constrained or secured environment where our application where our application is we are sure that it cannot break any part of our system or it cannot breach any security. That's something hard, and I think it will be a challenge for Elixir to change such configuration in the future. But we'll see how it will work. For now, I am still working on making Elixir logger more configurable from Elixir viewpoint. It is this whole talk came to life mostly because of my work on Elixir logger, where I wanted to make the configuration of the logger to be integrated with how you configure Erlang logger, mostly because Erlang logger have much more capabilities than Elixir logger. It can provide different ways to translate. It can provide different formatters for the same logger, and in Elixir logger, these two are intertwined between each other. So you have like JSON logger, which will log to standard output, but you cannot change the standard output to TCP connection or UDP connection because it is just connected with each other. So this is something that we still are trying to do whatever is possible, and look for solutions for configuring our applications in way that will be Elixir-ish still, like it is nowadays, but also in a way that would allow the system to be more secure and more performant and more useful for operators. I think I feel I don't know how long it already is. My talk is, but
So
mostly that's it.
So we still have a little bit of time. So if anyone has a question here, then let's turn on to Q&A. And if you have a question, then just send it on the chat. I'm sure Łukasz will have an answer. So basically, maybe a question from my side at the beginning. So for now, your suggestion would be to not use anything apart from config, not using runtime at all.
Like I said, that I don't really like using runtime X. I know that a lot of people find it much more easier to work than what we have before, and to be honest, I agree that it is very useful, and it is very good practice to use whatever is simpler. But from my viewpoint, I prefer on my own to use different approaches, especially that I use some other wild magic for during the runtime, like socket activation from systemd, which you can read on my blog soonish, because it is part 2 of my blog post about systemd integration. And when you use something like that, where you just try to pass file descriptor that is open during the startup of the application, then it doesn't really work with runtime configuration. Also, some other things like fetching configuration version of your file of your application doesn't really work with runtime X. So I feel that runtime X is mostly constraining me. And if you find it easier, and if you are starting your journey with Elixir and Phoenix, then it will be probably much easier work that way. But for me, it is more a constraint than the solution for a problem, where I just use, like I say, I use sysconfig from Erlang or whatever the config provider or whatever I will find the useful over there, and then I will use the callbacks from Phoenix or from Ecto to be able to connect and read variables, environment variables, or whatever other options there are to pass the configuration to my application.
Okay. So when it comes to Łukasz blog, you can see the button on the top. Recommend to check it out. For example, previously mentioned local definx article that landed on top of newsletters recently. You can check it out. All right. I don't see any questions to you. I assume you presented, this topic on the Elixir Conf.
Yeah,
okay.
probably it will be there, but it will be probably more expanded because I am still working with Jason Alex on for expanding it a little bit more with more examples, more code. As I said, I was a little bit ill, and today it was pretty harsh day for me. So sorry for the short talk, but it is all I could prepare for today, and I'm sorry for everyone. I'm very sorry, everyone, that it came like that, but it is not my day today.
No problem. First of all, thank you very much that you joined. If you not feel very well today and you still presented it, I find it very interesting, and I know that after the Elixir Conf, they after some time publish the videos on YouTube. So for those who will attend Elixir Conf, you will have a chance to see this topic like touched in a broader sense, and I think Łukasz is declaring that he's gonna feel better then, and you'll see it in a longer version. But yeah, if you cannot attend this conf, then you will still have a chance to see it after some time on YouTube. So keep this in mind. Okay, we have actually one question here. Does runtime config work with releases? Don't have much experience with it.
Yes, config runtimes work with releases. That was the whole point of it, of adding it to the Elixir. Basically, earlier versions were that we have config that was configuring in development and during the startup of Elixir application in runtime, like I said, in sysconfig. But later it was there was added the release X, which was running only in release. Now we have deprecated releases.ex, and now we have runtimes.exs, which is file that is run during the development and during the startup of the runtime. So it works with runtime. That was the whole point, that we will have one file that can be used both for configuring development and production. I think that this answer whole question. At least I hope so.
All right. Any more questions? Okay, it did answer the question. All right. So thank you very much, Łukasz. If you have a question to Łukasz, I believe he'll be happy to answer you you can. I think you can find his email on the website. Is that true?
About the configuration, not yet. I haven't written a blog post up.
Yeah,
about this
your
one.
email on your blog. Is it available there? Yeah.
Yes. Or you can ask me on Slack. I am as Howlet there, or Elixir Discord, or Elixir forum, or Erlang forum, or Elixir mailing list, or Erlang mailing list. I am listening on all these channels.
He's basically everywhere.
I don't know if there is any more channels over there that can be used. You can also use GitHub issues or whatever. Send me an owl or smoke signals. If you manage to send me a smoke signals, then I think I will try to read them.